I spoke to a woman in a taxi, and shockingly we were both heading to my husband's home.
It started like any other evening. I had spent the whole day running errands, replying to emails, and making sure the house didn't fall apart while my husband was away on a short trip. It felt like life was finally giving me a moment to breathe, to sit quietly with nothing pressing on my shoulders. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Honestly, I wanted nothing more than a peaceful night alone. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I walked to the curb and saw the familiar yellow cab approaching. I waved, sliding the door open and sinking into the back seat. The warmth of the car was comforting, a small bubble of safety in a city that always seemed to hum with tension. Then I noticed her, a woman sitting across from me. She looked ordinary at first glance, but there was something about her gaze that made my heart skip. It wasn't fear yet, but a strange familiarity, like seeing someone you think you know but can't place. We started talking, as people do when there's an awkward silence. Small talk, the weather, the city streets, nothing important, but her voice, the tone, had a way of latching onto my mind. Every laugh she let slip, every pause, felt like a signal, like a warning. And then she mentioned a street, and something inside me twisted. That street, it wasn't just any street. My chest tightened as I realized it was the street of my husband's house. I tried to calm myself, told my mind it was coincidence, that I was overreacting. But I couldn't stop thinking. How could two strangers, both heading to the same place at the same time, not be connected in some way? My thoughts spiraled, each possibility darker than the last. What if she had intentions I couldn't imagine? What if I was about to step into a moment that would shatter my life completely? The taxi moved slowly, every red light stretching moments into eternities. I stole a glance at her, and for a brief second, our eyes met. There was confusion there, fear, maybe, or maybe something else I didn't yet understand. My stomach sank, my hands gripped the seat. I felt frozen in time, suspended between the ordinary comfort of a taxi ride and the unknown danger that awaited at the end of it. Memories I had ignored before started rushing back. Tiny, uneasy moments I had shrugged off as unimportant. The subtle ways I had felt out of place in situations that should have felt normal. The sudden apprehension when strangers' glances lingered too long. The hints of judgment and tension in what should have been mundane encounters. And now, all of those small moments were colliding, a warning I could no longer ignore. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt. My mind raced with questions I couldn't voice. Why was she going there? What did she know? What did I know that I didn't even realize? Every instinct screamed at me that the ride I thought was ordinary was slowly turning into something I could never have prepared for. And then, the taxi made a slight detour. Or maybe I imagined it. Either way, my chest tightened, a sense of dread curling around me like a living thing. When we finally pulled up in front of the house, my heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The woman across from me shifted, eyes flicking toward the front door, and suddenly I felt the weight of everything pressing down. The fear, the confusion, the anticipation of the unknown. My husband was there, unaware of the storm about to land at his doorstep. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but I couldn't. I was trapped in the moment, caught between ordinary life and a sudden sharp edge of danger. I remember stepping out of the cab, feeling the evening air press down on me, cold yet suffocating. Every step toward the door felt heavy, like walking through invisible resistance. The woman beside me was silent, tense, her movements careful, precise, like she was trying to measure how close she could get without revealing too much. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and suspicion. Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last. And then the door opened, and the reality of the situation hit like a wave. I froze, my body locked, my mind scrambling. Everything I had assumed about my safe little life, my predictable routines, my trust in people, it all started to unravel. This moment, a seemingly simple encounter in a taxi, had become the turning point I hadn't anticipated, the first crack in the foundation of my life as I knew it. For a heartbeat, time stopped. I could hear the faint hum of the city behind us, but it felt distant, like a dream. All I could feel was the tension coiling tighter and tighter inside me. I wanted answers. I needed to know what was happening. And I knew, deep down, that by the time this night ended, nothing, my life, my trust, my sense of safety, would ever be the same again. My hands were still trembling as I followed the woman to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The porch light flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us, like the city itself was warning me to turn back. I wanted to speak, to ask why she was here, what this all meant. But the words refused to come. My throat felt tight, raw with fear and disbelief. When she reached the door, she hesitated. I noticed a flicker in her eyes, something fragile, almost vulnerable. But there was also a hardness there, a quiet determination that made my stomach twist. She wasn't just any stranger. Something about her presence told me that she had a purpose, that her journey here was deliberate. And suddenly, I understood that whatever this moment was, it wasn't going to be simple. The door opened, and my heart leapt into my throat. My husband was standing there, smiling at first, completely unaware of the storm that had been quietly building outside the door. And then he saw her, and then he saw me. The smile faltered. Confusion, hesitation. Something shifted in the space between us, a tension so sharp it cut through the evening air. The woman stepped forward, calm but firm, and in that moment I realized she had been carrying a story too. A story that was about to collide with mine in the most unexpected way. My mind raced. What was she about to say? What truths were going to spill out here, on my doorstep, in front of my husband, with me caught in the middle? Every possibility seemed worse than the last. I wanted to run. I wanted to retreat into the safety of ignorance, to pretend that this encounter was a mistake. But my feet were frozen, planted firmly on the porch, as if some invisible force held me there. The city felt like it had stopped around us. The hum of the streets, the distant chatter, even the faint rustle of leaves. It all faded, leaving just the three of us in a suspended moment that felt both ordinary and catastrophic at the same time. She spoke finally, her voice calm, measured, but carrying a weight I could feel deep in my chest. What she said didn't make sense at first. It sounded like small talk, almost polite. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle implication that everything I had believed about my life, about trust and safety, could be wrong. I could feel my pulse spike, each beat hammering in my ears as my mind tried to connect the dots faster than they could appear. Then the truth started to reveal itself, in fragments at first, like shards of glass cutting into my understanding of the world I had lived in. I saw patterns I had ignored, subtle signs I had brushed off, glimpses of something unfair, something unjust, that had been hidden in plain sight. And the fear turned into anger, into helplessness, because I realized that this wasn't just about a taxi ride or a random encounter. It was about the way people are judged, assumptions are made, and the world can shift again and stew without warning. My husband's confusion mirrored my own, but his face was clouded with uncertainty and defensiveness. I wanted to scream, to demand clarity, but my voice shook. The woman across from me, across from reality itself, was now a living testament to the unexpected collisions of fate. I could feel my emotions twisting, spiraling, as every second stretched out like hours. I hated that I felt powerless. I hated that I had been blind to the signs. And yet, I knew that this moment was unavoidable. Time became distorted. Each movement, each glance, each breath was amplified. I felt my own heartbeat echo in my ears, felt the weight of judgment, of misunderstanding, of secrecy pressing down on me. I thought about how fragile trust really is, how quickly it can crumble when reality intrudes. And I realized that life had handed me a test of courage, of patience, of endurance. And I had no choice but to face it. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm presence and the inevitability in her eyes spoke louder than any words could. And in that silence, the truth began to crystallize. This was more than a personal confrontation. It was a reflection of the ways the world judges and isolates people, the small but piercing injustices that accumulate over time and change the course of lives in ways you can't always see. I wanted to step back, to shrink away from the weight of it all, but my body refused. I stood there, trembling, heart racing, as the revelation fully landed. Every expectation I had about my life, about safety and certainty, was gone. All that remained was the raw, uncomfortable clarity that some moments demand we face them head-on, no matter how terrifying. And in that moment, I realized something else too. I wasn't alone. Even in the quiet, terrifying intensity of this encounter, I could feel a connection to the wider world, to the countless people who have faced sudden, inexplicable shocks that test their trust, their courage, and their resilience. I could feel their stories echoing through mine, a reminder that life isn't always fair, but it is shared. By the time the tension started to ease, I was drained, trembling from the emotional intensity, yet strangely awake, fully aware of the fragility and power of life. I knew that this night, this ride, this encounter, had already changed me, forever. And I also knew that the lessons it carried, about caution, awareness, trust, and the quiet injustices that shape our world, were not mine alone. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me as I stepped inside the house. Every sound seemed sharper, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wanted to believe that once the door closed, everything would return to normal. But I knew, deep down, that normal had already slipped through my fingers. The woman followed behind me, calm but deliberate, her eyes scanning the living room as if she was searching for something. I froze mid-step, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt. This was my home, my sanctuary, but it had become the stage for something I couldn't control. Every instinct screamed at me to step back, to take a breath and think, but there was no room for hesitation. My husband looked at us both, confusion clouding his face. He opened his mouth, probably to ask who she was, why she was here, but the words never came out. There was a tension in the air so thick I could almost touch it. The woman's presence filled the room in a way that made everything else seem insignificant. I felt my chest tighten as I realized that whatever was about to happen could change everything. My trust, my safety, my life as I knew it. She finally spoke, her voice low but steady, and suddenly, the room felt smaller. Her words carried weight, truth wrapped in calm delivery, and every syllable felt like a hammer striking my chest. I felt my knees weaken, my stomach flip, as tales unfolded, details I had never expected, things I had been blind to, realities I had refused to see. My mind raced to catch up, but the pieces were sliding past too fast, and I felt utterly powerless. I wanted to shout, to demand clarity, to make sense of the chaos, but my voice faltered. All I could do was listen, watch, and feel every emotion crash through me: fear, disbelief, anger, hurt, and a strange, cold clarity. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding. This was a collision of lives, choices, and hidden truths that had been waiting to surface. The taxi, the streets, the chance encounter. They weren't coincidences. They were the beginning of a reckoning I hadn't seen coming. My husband's expression shifted. I could see the confusion, then the dawning realization, and finally a tightness in his jaw that spoke louder than any words. And in that moment, I felt it. An avalanche of raw emotion, the shock of seeing everything I trusted unravel. I felt betrayed, but not just by circumstance. I felt betrayed by the illusions I had held, the trust I had placed in the people and life around me, the complacency that had lulled me into thinking I was safe. The woman didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm presence said it all. Her eyes reflected the truth in a way that cut deeper than any confrontation could. And I realized that life had a way of forcing clarity in the most brutal, unavoidable ways. The ordinary streets I had walked countless times, the familiar sounds of my neighborhood, they suddenly felt charged with meaning. Every shadow a reminder that nothing was guaranteed, that even the safest spaces could harbor revelation. Time seemed to slow. Every second stretched into an eternity as the room held its breath. I could feel my heart pounding, my hands shaking, my mind spinning through every possible outcome. The fear wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what it revealed, about how fragile life can be when hidden truths suddenly emerge, about how quickly a trust can fracture, leaving you standing alone in a room full of silence and tension. And then it all hit me, the full, devastating picture. The coincidences, the small details, the quiet warnings I had ignored, they weren't coincidences at all. They were signs, clues, all pointing to this moment, this confrontation, this irreversible shift. I could feel the fear and anger intertwining, twisting together into a tight knot that seemed to squeeze the air from my lungs. I wanted to run, to scream, to somehow undo what was happening, but I couldn't. I was trapped in the reality of it, forced to face the consequences of everything I hadn't anticipated. The silence stretched again, but it was different this time. Heavy, suffocating, undeniable. I realized I had crossed a line into understanding something larger than myself. How the world can be unfair, how life can pivot in an instant, how we can be blindsided by forces we never saw coming. And even in that weight, there was a strange clarity, a piercing awareness that the moment demanded courage, honesty, and endurance. By the time the tension began to shift, I was trembling, exhausted, but fully awake. The emotional shock had stripped away the illusions, leaving raw understanding. I could see now that this night, this ride, this encounter, it had changed me. It had revealed truths about trust, vulnerability, and human resilience that I could never unsee. And even as fear lingered, I knew one thing: nothing would ever feel ordinary again. I could feel the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving me raw and exposed, yet strangely alive. And as I stood there, heart still racing, I realized the most terrifying, powerful truth of all. Life can pivot in the blink of an eye. Strangers can become catalysts for revelation, and even the familiar can hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. In that room, standing between fear and understanding, I knew the journey wasn't over, not yet. The night had shown me the fragility of trust, the hidden injustices that can surface without warning, and the unrelenting power of truth. And as I caught my breath, I couldn't help but wonder, how do you move forward when everything you believed was safe suddenly isn't? After what felt like an eternity, the storm of emotions slowly began to settle, leaving a heavy, almost hollow quiet in its wake. I sank onto the edge of the couch, my hands still trembling, heart pounding, my mind racing to catch up with everything that had happened. I wanted to cry, scream, run, but none of that seemed possible. All I could do was sit there and feel the raw weight of the night pressing down on me, the clarity piercing through the confusion. The woman who had stepped into my life just hours ago remained calm, standing a few steps away, her eyes soft now, but still filled with an intensity I couldn't ignore. She wasn't a threat anymore, not exactly, but she was a mirror, reflecting all the hidden cracks in my life, the vulnerabilities I hadn't dared to confront. My husband sat in silence too, his face pale and unreadable, like he was grappling with the same torrent of realization I had been drowning in. I thought about that taxi ride, the ordinary beginning, the creeping sense of unease, the strange familiarity that had set my nerves on fire. It had seemed so simple at first, just a ride home. But by the time we reached the doorstep, everything had changed. Life had a way of forcing truth on you in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, it arrives disguised as coincidence. I realized that night that safety and trust are delicate things, easy to take for granted until the moment arrives that proves how fragile they really are. As the minutes stretched, I reflected on how unfair life could be, how easily misunderstanding and circumstance could spiral into fear, confusion, and pain. And yet, in the aftermath, I also saw something else. A strange, uncomfortable kind of clarity. The shock, the fear, the revelation. It had sinked, ripped away the illusions I had carried. I could see patterns I had ignored, assumptions I had made, and small injustices I had brushed aside without realizing it. The taxi, the streets, the random seeming encounter. They had all been a harsh lesson in awareness, in paying attention, in understanding that life doesn't always give you warnings, but it does give you clues if you're willing to notice. I felt a strange connection to all the others who had faced moments like this, moments where ordinary life collapses in an instant, leaving you exposed and questioning everything. The fear and uncertainty I had felt were not unique. They were echoes of experiences countless people endure, often silently, often unseen, and the thought made me both angry and grateful. Angry at the injustices that allow such moments to occur, and grateful for the awareness that had been forced upon me. By the time the woman finally left, the night felt impossibly long, though only minutes had passed. I sat alone with my husband afterward, both of us too drained to speak. And in that silence, I understood something vital. The events of that night weren't just about one taxi ride, one encounter, or even one home. They were about trust, vulnerability, and the quiet injustices that can suddenly surface in the most ordinary moments. They were about the fragility of human connections, and how easily assumptions and circumstances can shift the world around you. And I realized something else. The fear, the uncertainty, and even the anger, all of it, was a gift in a strange, difficult way. It forced me to see clearly, to confront reality without sugarcoating it, to acknowledge that life doesn't always follow the predictable patterns we crave. And while the night had exposed my vulnerabilities, it also reminded me of my strength, my resilience, and my capacity to face the unexpected and survive it. I still feel it sometimes, the echo of that taxi ride, the tension of that evening, the weight of what could have been. But I also carry the lesson forward, to pay attention, to question assumptions, to recognize the subtle injustices that can ripple through ordinary life, and to remember that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just standing still, breathing through the fear, and moving forward when you don't yet see the path. So I ask myself, and I ask you too, what would you do if life suddenly demanded that you face the truth in the most terrifying way? What secrets might be hiding just beneath the surface of your everyday world, waiting for a moment to reveal themselves? And when they do, will you let fear control you? Or will you find the strength to see clearly, feel deeply, and act with awareness? Because that night taught me something I will never forget. The ordinary streets, the casual encounters, the people who cross our paths, they can all carry lessons, warnings, and truths we might not want to face. And the only way to truly survive them, to grow from them, is to confront them fully, without flinching, with honesty, courage, and an awareness that even in the most ordinary moments, life is teaching you something extraordinary. Even now, when I think back to that night, my chest tightens and my mind races through every detail. The taxi, the woman, the streets, my husband's face. They are etched into my memory like a photograph I can't unsee. It wasn't just the shock, the fear, or the betrayal that lingered. It was the way it forced me to confront the fragility of everything I had taken for granted. The life I thought was secure, the trust I believed unshakable, even the ordinary routines I had ignored, they all felt suddenly fragile. Like glass teetering on the edge of a table, I spent the next days replaying every moment, analyzing each gesture, each word, each glance. I realized that life doesn't warn you in grand announcements. It whispers in tiny signs, in coincidences that seem meaningless until they expire, load into revelation. And too often we ignore them. We ignore the unease in our stomachs, the tension in the air, the subtle messages that demand our attention. I had almost ignored them too. Almost. But that night changed me. I understood that fear isn't always a warning. It can be a teacher. The woman in the taxi, the unavoidable collision with truth, had shown me how life can pivot in a single heartbeat, how trust can be tested, assumptions challenged, and safety called into question, and more importantly, how resilient we can be when faced with the unexpected. I had been forced to feel everything at once, the fear, the confusion, the anger, the helplessness, and somehow I survived it all. Somehow I learned from it all. The experience also forced me to see the broader picture, the quiet injustices and the assumptions that the world places on people every day. The fear and tension I had felt weren't unique to me. They were echoes of the countless experiences of people who live in a society that judges first and questions later, who face prejudice and suspicion in moments that seem ordinary but carry enormous weight. That realization hit harder than anything else. I understood that my story wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger truth about how fragile trust can be, how easily life can pivot, and how important it is to notice, reflect, and respond with awareness. And yet, even as I carry the weight of that night, I also carry a sense of clarity and power. Life may test us, but it also teaches us. It forces us to recognize the strength we didn't know we had. It shows us the importance of listening to our instincts, acknowledging the signs we might otherwise dismiss, and confronting reality, no matter how terrifying it may be. The lessons of that night are still with me, whispering in quiet moments, reminding me that awareness, courage, and reflection are more powerful than fear. I've shared this story because it matters, not just because of what happened to me, but because so many people live through moments like this, moments of revelation, moments of injustice, moments that shake the foundations of their trust and safety. And too often, those moments are ignored, minimized, or forgotten. But they shouldn't be. Every story like this is a reminder that life is fragile, that trust is precious, and that even ordinary moments can carry extraordinary lessons. So I leave you with this. Pay attention. Notice the small signs, the subtle warnings, the coincidences that feel too strange to ignore. Trust your instincts, even when your mind doubts them. And when life throws the unexpected in your path, don't shrink away. Face it fully, with awareness, courage, and a willingness to learn. Because those are the moments that define us. Those are the moments that reveal what we are truly capable of. And finally, I ask you, what would you do if your ordinary day suddenly became extraordinary in the worst possible way? How would you confront the truths that life forces upon you, even when they shake the very foundation of everything you thought you knew? The answer isn't simple, but one thing is clear. Every story matters. Every choice matters. And the courage to face the unexpected, no matter how terrifying, is what changes not just our lives, but the way we see the world. That night, I survived. I learned. And I will never see ordinary moments the same way again. Neither will you.